Hello, and welcome to Vermont Interfaith Action's Conversation with Candidates 2020. VIA is a faith-based grassroots community organizing project made up of 59 member and affiliated congregations throughout the state. We work together as a coalition, including the Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, Unitarian Universalist, Buddhist, and Muslim traditions. Our goal is to effect systemic change around issues that are identified at the grassroots level. Issues that affect the families and individuals who attend our congregations and whom we reach out to in our communities. In years past, VIA has hosted events across the state in order to hear from candidates about the issues VIA leaders and clergy are concerned about. This year, we've invited gubernatorial candidates to fill out a questionnaire and join us for a 20-minute conversation about their answers. Today, I am joined by Emily Peyton of Putney, Vermont. Emily, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much, Josh.
Thank you for being here. So let's get into the first question. Many of our faith traditions are concerned with how we treat the vulnerable populations in our state. For instance, those with pre-existing conditions or those who have been historically and continue to be discriminated against. How will you model respect for vulnerable populations?
Well, at the core of my leadership and when I started to run in 2020, it was about restoring the method of having the right to the money that our capacities warrant. In other words, we ought to be housing everybody as a matter of right, as a matter of humanity. We ought to be feeding everybody. But what we have is a US dollar system that systematically creates scarcity and in the most cruel and ruthless way, and even has companies that are profiteering off of our most vulnerable. So what I am proposing for Vermont and the type of transformation that I want to see is that we implement what I call a just money supply. So the way I like to describe it is that when we're using the US dollar system and we're using the rules of debt, we're using the rules of taxation and of revenue and all those rules that, again, are systematically feeding greed. And greed, in my mind, is the most credible danger to humanity, the ruthlessness of greed. What we need to look at are mechanisms that we can expand our money supply. And when I say money, I mean our means of exchange. So there's several that we can implement so that we have more means of doing business with one another without taxing people. So with a people's exchange, which allows for all the business that we can do in Vermont, by Vermont, with Vermont resources and amongst each other, we could do things like we could build housing for everybody with the trees we have here, with the services we have here, and maybe we have to use US dollars to get nails or something. But you can see that creating a virtuous economy that rewards virtue, rewards activities for the good of all, necessarily we will have the right to fund the things that we want to see happen in our heart. So often we are limited because the bank will not give us money for things that isn't profitable to the bank. But when we get out of the sandbox of the US dollar, come onto the beach and say, oh, there's different ways that we can do exchanges, and there's different ways that we can have a means of exchange, then we can create the kind of fairness, then we can expand humanity the way we want it to be. We no longer have to have people victims of scarcity. So the most vulnerable amongst us, they need to be able to have the capacity to participate in the economy with dignity. And too often they are on the most stressful of budgets. So the People's Exchange would absolutely help that. There's other methods that we can use to increase our money supply, such as having a public bank for Vermont. The public bank is working within the U.S. dollar system, but what it will do is it will make the use of our tax dollars available to legislators so that they can use it as collateral to lend through local credit unions and back the type of activity we want to do. For example, if we want to loan through a credit union to make, let's say, a farm that was seized through taxation into a community village where we learn about sustainability and we have vulnerable people of all kinds. The elderly are becoming more vulnerable, living in sustainable net zero practice. The Bank of Vermont can back those types of loans. You know, it's a kind of a wonky topic that I've become an expert at ever since 9/11. So sometimes people's eyes glaze over when you go into all the ways that we can expand the use of money for the things that we want to do. But that is the primary driver for my leadership, is that we move our systems of exchange so that they reward justice and they reward our virtue, and we allow ourselves to move out of only using the U.S. dollar to do that.
Thank you.
Can I also add about the neighborhood councils?
This question, you've gone for about 5 minutes. Can we move on to another question? We want to make sure we cover all the questions in our allotted time.
Sure, come up, but this will be coming up soon then.
Okay. Thank you for that response. And another big concern during this time is the economy. Given the current uncertainties of when and if Vermonters who have lost jobs will gain them back, what creative and innovative ideas do you have to help with job creation that does not further the income inequality gap?
Well, I think I touched upon them, you know, the different ways that we can implement a just money supply that include a People's Exchange, a Public Bank of Vermont, which incidentally North Dakota already has. So they sailed through the 2008 meltdown with job growth. So what's happened in Vermont is I started running on that, and we have to overcome the misdirections of lobbyists in order to implement it, and we will when I am governor. And we also could implement a common good payment system, and we also could implement a Vermont credit card. I don't know why we haven't. So what we need to do is to help the people of Vermont step into their self-directed purpose. So with these, the capacity to fund the things we want, we can address the climate change, the sustainability issues in a much more creative and personalized approach, rather than simply saying we need more jobs for people to work at Walmart or for people to work selling goods from China. What I'm talking about is nothing less than a transformation of our economy so that we can creatively step into all the things that we know in our heart is possible. So where we have too many oppressive jobs, and we have too many people who are having to work in jobs that aren't inspiring. Now, we need to create the environment where the people in people's assemblies and neighborhood councils decide the work that we need to do. Maybe we need to grow more apple trees so that we can come through the coming food shortages that this pandemic has created. And we wouldn't be necessarily, probably we will be growing more chickens or something because apple trees take a while. But nonetheless, the point being is the quality of our life needs to improve. It's not okay to have economic oppression that forces people to work at meaningless work. That's not okay, and it's not what I want to see. I want to see people who are able to fulfill their life purpose, and I want to create a money system to do it. And I also think it's not okay that politicians have so roundly failed us. Politicians have allowed this climate change problem, this economy to serve. They've allowed Jeff Bezos to be the first trillionaire. They have allowed the planetary destruction. That is why we need to organize, and it's through my leadership to help us become cohesive in neighborhood councils, people's assemblies, roundtables, and summits, so we can methodically invest in the people the power to dynamically govern a transformation of how we live with one another with a higher code of conduct, a nonviolent code of conduct.
Thank you. And transportation can be an influencing factor on someone's job prospects and has an impact on the environment. What are your top 2 transportation priorities?
Well, this is where we've had some silver linings with the COVID. Is we've all learned how to do just Zoom, and we've learned how to work at home. So where you don't have to go to a job, or where your neighborhood is, or where you live is providing you with a craft or a job or a need that you can fulfill that's rewarded, then you're not traveling so far. Of course, we want to end all of our pollution, but where I want to get back to the possibility of working online, because it's very important to talk about the fact that fiber to premises is a safe way to do wireless. And there's a lot of talk about broadband. And I know I'm kind of mixing if you promise me we'll get to the problem of 5G, I will continue with just the transportation problem. But we could be, once we rebuild the trust in one another, we could be implementing things like a pickup sharing program where 5 neighbors share a pickup. There's so much that we can do when we come together creatively and with the ability to fund what we have in our hearts. So that is why I will be calling together circles of people with the power to fund the ideas that we have and that we can implement. Even, whether we have corridors that are just for electric bikes, or whether we put gondolas, we use sort of chairlifts. There's so many ways we can solve our issues, and we need to unleash our creativity and not be bound by any ideas that we can only fund those things that are going to make a profit for a bank.
Thank you. And our final question for you is around education. What would be your top 2 priorities in making education more inclusive and accessible for students? How do we ensure educational equity when some students have access to high-speed internet and others do not?
Okay, that fiber to premises. We have paid already our cable bills the amount of money to have fiber to premises, and it's important that internet is a right, but it's important that we do it in a safe way. Now, the 5G has been rolled out, and it's been rolled out without people really understanding what it is or having the choice to stop it. So as governor, I will call together a people's inquiry into the risks of 5G, and I won't get too far into them, but they are significant, to make sure this is exactly what we want, because we can have safe internet with fiber to premises, and I believe it's all right. Now, COVID has offered us another silver lining, because what we've been suffering from is the compliance-based schooling, where we're the national model is to make students comply. And teachers have been suffering from this as well. Now, since COVID, we have an opportunity to totally rethink school. Perhaps we, when we come together, decide that we want to fund groups of homeschoolers, have the same budget, and they can hire teachers from the school system who will then be freer to teach their own particular strength, and that the students will not have to be medicated to comply. And perhaps we will be having some students that will want to be learning with their hands, and others that will want to do more of the book learnings. Either way, we need to increase our capacity for grammar, for rhetoric, and for logic, which has not been applied in schooling. So that's for the undergrads. I want to remove compliance-based schooling. I think that we need to have independent and creative thinkers, and we need to support the life path of our youngest. And we haven't mentioned how at our youngest is when we start to deal with addictions. We contract with our youngest kids so that when they agree not to try recreational drugs or alcohol until they're 22. Iceland has already shown that they've gone from the worst addictions to the very best in Europe by implementing this protocol. And I will have Dr. Antley of Burlington lead my health department for that outcome, because that is where we need to start with that. Now, when we get into the higher levels of education, I am part of a group that has been developing a Hempstone Villages plan. This is a way to grow into the knowledge of sustainability. As you know, our builders and our tradespeople are 50 and older on average. We have not the skill sets that we have not developed them while we've been focusing on these paper degrees from colleges where people aren't finding the work. So when if you go to hempstonevillages.org, you'll find a way that we have married the problems of not enough people knowing how to become net zero, the problems of sequestering elderly people off in nursing homes and not continuing their life purpose and their sense of purpose and continuing the community with them, and also the problem of having these communities refreshed with tourists coming in. So I think it's on both of my websites. It's a member-run franchise, so we will initiate Hempstone Villages. They'll each have their own name, and they'll be run by members, and they may have a specialty, but we'll initiate them around the state, starting with at least 5. And in this way, we can combine hands-on learning of how to build with natural materials that sequester carbon and create a healthy environment, and how to farm in a way that improves the soils and sequesters carbon, and how to live together in community, again, which has been so destroyed, again, by the ruthless greed of those who run the US dollar system. So when we employ those, and we also look at Bethel, who has, of course, implemented a people's university, which is where we have so much wisdom in our elders. And as you know, 35% of us are elders. And many of us want to share it. We're not going to go back and get a teacher's degree to do it. But Bethel has found how to do it by having a people's university. Let's do more of this sort of thing so that we can share wisdom together.
Thank you. And we have about 2 minutes left. Is there anything else you would like to say?
Let's see. There are on this planet right now enemies of humanity. And I wanted to talk about Japan, because Japan has, in Japan, they haven't closed down their economy. They haven't ordered masks. They haven't done testing. And they're about 126 million people. They've ended the state of emergency. People could go to the hairdressers. They could hug one another. They could comfort dying people. And the same is also true of South Dakota, and 6 other states have really not had these protocols. And they have come out with under 1,000 deaths for 126 million people. Now, what I think one of the important differences is, and also South Dakota has had as low death as we have, even though they have larger cities, like 175,000, where our largest is 44,000. I think the difference is that they haven't had the fear being channeled through the media. They have not made people so terrified and so frightened of one another. So the protocols we've had here have made us frightened of each other. It has made people afraid of one another, and that is that's something that has harmed us in and of itself. And we can even see that places that have not allowed the media to get people absolutely terrified, they've had better outcomes. So I wanted to add that in, that I'll be calling together an inquiry to look at the outcomes now that we have 2020 hindsight, and look at how we can do this much better without encroaching on our rights to assemble and our needs to assemble. And
Thank you so much for sharing with us today. All the best in your campaign efforts, and to our folks listening. Primary voting is on Tuesday, August 11th. You can request your mail-in ballots if you haven't already from the Secretary of State's website, or by calling your local town clerk's office. Thank you for watching.
Thank you, Josh.